Okay, I guess we can get started. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. We want to say thank you so much, first of all, for being um, History Keepers, monthly donors to Densho. My name is Christina Nakata. I'm the marketing manager here at Densho, working on the fund development team. And Micah, do you want to introduce yourself? Introduce
Yeah, of
yourself?
course. Hi, everyone. My name is Micah Merriman. I use she, her pronouns. I am the archivist here at Densho. And as I mentioned, I'm actually at the Densho offices here in Seattle, Washington.
And we will introduce our other panelists here shortly. But we just want to say that thank you so much for being a partner with Densho in helping to preserve our history. As monthly donors, you really help us to provide regular and reliable support to the organization, and we really, really appreciate that so much. Okay, so today our focus is on our internship program. Um, Over the years, Densho has had a lot of archives interns, and so we figured it would be an interesting topic to gather some interns from across the years, from some different eras of interns, and have them share about their experiences, because I guess it's kind of an area of Densho's work that we don't, I guess, talk about as much publicly. It's more of our internal program. Um, oh, sorry, I guess I covered this already. Thank you so much to the History Keepers. So I'll have Micah talk a little bit about the internship program. We'll start there.
Yeah. So Densho's internship program is at the heart of our preservation efforts here, and we are helping prepare young professionals with the tools and skills to become stewards of history, whether that's the community's history or any other organization's histories. They gain skills in digitizing materials, editing, performing quality control on digital images, transcribing documents, cataloging, indexing, data management, working with digital images and physical materials. I myself was a Densho intern way back in the day. Alana and I were actually in the same cohort of interns. So, this is a little blast from our past. But Densho has been conducting internships since about 2012. And we've had a range of the internships as our intern or former interns that we've gathered here. We'll talk about. We've done fully in person, like 3 to 5 cohort internships. We've done fully remote internships, and now we do hybrid internships that I help supervise here at Densho. So each one of these interns can talk about, or former interns can talk about their experiences in those different sorts of environments. We typically have between 1 to 5 interns each year, usually ranging around 2 or 3 that stick with us for usually 6 months or so at a time. At least one of our internships currently right now is being funded by Frank and June Sato, who gave us a very large donation to help fund and manage and keep our internship program going. We also receive regular funding from For Culture and the Washington State Historical Society and the University of Washington to help support our internship, help support interns who want to work with Densho.
I guess in addition to this, we've also in the past had or and currently have internships in other departments. So we currently are on the lookout for an intern to support Briania in the encyclopedia work. So this is a graduate internship position that gets to do a little bit more of the research and supporting and writing of the encyclopedia.
Yeah. Uh, we also, sometimes have just people who come on board as volunteers or through their academic schoolwork, who basically end up volunteering with Densho through one of our digitization internships. And those are usually much smaller scale. An average intern works between 300 to 500 hours at Densho, but sometimes those smaller scale class-based ones are about 60 hours.
Great. So let me stop sharing and then remove the spotlight on Micah. And so we'll get into our panel. If we could start with Alana, and if you could introduce yourself, your name, where you're located, and what do you love most about the archives? Start there.
Yeah. So my name is Alana Varner. I use she, her pronouns. I am located in Tucson, Arizona. And I really love archives as a space where we can reconcile with questions of justice and our values and really document experiences and create um, a vision of history that resonates with a vast population. And so that's something that's really important about archives to me.
Thanks so much. We'll go to Evan.
Hi, my name is Evan McGonigal, and I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, which is where I'm from originally. I interned 2 years ago, I think we just determined, summer of 2023 through the fall. And I was working with Micah and Sarah and working on a number of projects that I still think about all the time. So it's been really meaningful. I really love archives in general. I think partially because I'm very interested in the way that context influences meaning in everything in society. And archives are a space in which the context around individual bits of information is deliberately well preserved. And I think that that fascinates me because archives therefore exist to be sort of continuously interpreted and reinterpreted. So that means that a collection like Densho's can be called on in different ways to meet the moment as things progress. And there are a lot of ways in which the shifting, for example, political context that we live in can create new angles of value, like new sources of value in old materials all the time. And I just find that really exciting.
Hi, my name is Will. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently in Seattle. Um, Currently at Densho, actually. And I think one thing I really love about archives is sort of the archive as community space. Even Densho, where that is kind of virtual, having a sort of shared site, shared um collection that you can build a sort of collective memory and shared sense of identity around, I think is something that's really powerful. Especially for something like Densho, where those resources can be accessed, by anyone with internet connection. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I love everybody's different perspectives on why the archives are so valuable. I mean, personally, I love one of the big things that drew me to Densho and to working in this field personally was digital preservation and digital access and making sure that information and history are preserved and easily accessible by anyone, anywhere, at any time. So it's great to hear everybody's perspectives on why they love the archives. Even though I know when all of you were interns, because I worked with every single one of you, it'd be great for our panel or for our attendees to hear about when you were an intern and then what projects or collections that you worked on and what you did here at Densho. I guess we can start backwards and start with Will.
Sure. So last year I was Densho's Frank and June Sato, who were mentioned earlier, the Frank and June Sato intern. Um, I primarily worked on the Kanaji Demoto collection, who was a landscape archivist primarily on the East Coast a while back. So that was a lot of digital processing that I did in a sort of hybrid format because I'm in Seattle right now in the MLS program at UW. So having something where I could, commute down to the International District every now and then to do some scanning work or be in the office, but then also the convenience of being able to work from home was something that was incredibly nice to have during my first year in my program here. Um, and then I also worked a bit on the Tad Ishida collection, which was a series of letters written back home by a private Tadashi Ishida who was drafted into World War II. and wrote a letter back home about every 30 minutes. So those were fun to go through.
That's really cool, Will, to learn that you just also were working on the Demoto collection, because that's the main way that I spent my time when I was at Densho. I think I mentioned previously I was an intern in the summer and fall of 2023. And I got to do a couple of different collections, which is really fun. I started out with the Domoto collection. I think I spent the bulk of my time in the course of the internship doing image processing and describing items from that collection, and sort of summarizing new additions to the collection, because there was already a lot that had been contributed to Densho previously, and this is sort of a new batch. And so I was able to build on a lot of the work that Micah had already done and that previous interns had already done, which was cool to feel like I was contributing to something. And I wrote a blog post about that collection, or about my experience working with Khan's letters and diaries specifically. And then once I finished that, I was working on the Tomio Itabashi and Francis Itabashi Nishimura collection, which was a really different collection. The bulk of those materials are from much earlier, from before incarceration, and told the story of how those siblings who had been part of a family farming in, I believe, Washington, had lost their claim to the land that they were living and working on, due basically to discrimination, in which they were written into the will of the person whose land they were working on. And then after he died, the family wrote them out of the will, and it went all the way to the state Supreme Court. So that was a really interesting contrast, because instead of it being really incarceration focused, it sort of helped me understand more of the background of what a lot of Japanese Americans had experienced before the war came up, and the kinds of discrimination, but also the kinds of meaningful connections that they had with different people who made space for them or didn't in this country. And after doing that, I worked a little bit on pages from the Post and Chronicle, and contributing to some tagging for the names database.
Evan, could you give us a little bit of a recap of what you wrote about in your blog post?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so Kondamoto, as Will mentioned, was a landscape architect, primarily, but he also was an architect of residential homes and a few different other types of properties, I think. And he studied under Frank Lloyd Wright, and his relationship with Frank Lloyd Wright began before the war. I think very shortly before the war. And then he was able to use that relationship to get himself and his family out of camp, because he had a connection and was able to show that he had an employment opportunity. So that the intertwining of those stories is really fascinating to me, and I was interested to explore how Khan had taken aspects of his camp experience with him in his later career, and how he was able to incorporate things that were it feels like pretty definitively traceable to the environment, the physical environment and the social environment that he spent time in Merced and Amachi. And it was a way of complicating my idea of camp as something that was purely negative and oppressive, and looking at the ways that different people really found opportunities to learn, opportunities to take either skill building opportunities or the opportunity to kind of develop an ethos, in Khan's case around design, and like what design should do for people, and what the point of design is, which is partially for him, I think it's clear he really valued beauty, but he also really thought that design should work for people and make people comfortable in their environments. And you can see the ways that he took value from his time in really inhospitable barracks and turned that into values that he incorporated into his later practice, like resourcefulness, economy with materials, and I think what I called like a compassionate approach to design and architecture in that blog post, in which he was very, very responsive to the individual needs of clients, whether it was like physical stature, he would design a space around someone's physical height, but also cultural differences, and the spaces that he created for people were really for those people, which is interesting after you look at the way that he and so many families like his were dehumanized and sort of flattened in the camp experience, in which they were kind of crammed into these spaces that were uniform, and many of which were not designed for human beings at all, that were like horse barracks and things like that. So thinking about how much he took sort of ethical and philosophical value from that was the focus of the post.
Thank you for adding on. I just thought your blog post was really interesting. We should talk about it. Thanks so much. Alana?
Hi, again. I was an intern a while ago. So as Micah mentioned, we were in the same intern cohort. I started, I think, in 2017, and interned a little bit into 2018. I worked on a variety of digitization collections, both digitizing and describing collections. And unfortunately, because it was a while ago, I don't remember in the same beautiful details as Evan and Will. Although I do really often think about one of the collections that I worked with, and that is the Min and Uhachi Temesa collection. And Min Temesa was a draft resistor and a leader of the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee. And the collection contains a lot of correspondence, both through Min and Uhachi while Min was serving his prison sentence for his actions in resisting the draft, as well as Uhachi while he was, dealing with the experience of camp and property loss and all of the things that he experienced and communicating with neighbors and seeking allies and communities. I think that there are a few things that really just struck me from that, like how profoundly impacted these lives were, and you can see those traces far beyond the camp experience. And yeah, so that is a collection that I think about often when I think about my time at Densho.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I realized we maybe should have asked this question earlier, I guess, chronologically, but that's okay. Could you all share a little bit about your educational background? I think that might be interesting for people to learn about. Or
Sure.
current, not some of you, it's not your background, it's your current educational studies.
I'm unmuted, so I'll go ahead and talk. I have two master's degrees. I graduated from the University of Texas, Austin in 2015 with a Master's of Science and Information Studies, which is similar to the Master's of Library and Information Studies degree that many of the other folks in archives have. And then I also have a master's degree in women and gender studies, as well as a graduate focus in Mexican American and Latinx studies. And my academic work is focusing around what archives look like as a social construct and what histories are given value and representation and how that shows up in archival spaces.
I can go next. So my background is in English literature, actually. I was a English major as a undergrad at Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. And I graduated a long time ago in 2010, and then have kind of I spent a lot of time working in the archives after I graduated. I spent about 6 years employed in the Bryn Mawr College Library and Archives, and spent a long time making up my mind. And then after moving back to Boston, decided that this was what I wanted to do. So I enrolled in Simmons University, which is where I'm still studying, and started in 2022. And I am still finishing my degree. So I have another semester left, and then I will have hopefully everything I need to launch myself into the archives world.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm currently in the MLS program at UW, which I went straight into after undergrad at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which interestingly enough are two universities that are not only both UW, but they're also both on isthmuses, which there are like 3 populated isthmuses in North America. Anyway, in undergrad, I studied communications because I was super into college radio. And then I also was a French major. So library science was actually a bit of a late pivot for me. But I'm super glad I ended up into it because I've been loving it so far.
I mean, with everyone's backgrounds here is part of why we were so excited to bring them on board. Will's experience with radio and audiovisual materials was a big boon that we didn't have a lot of experience with. And Evan's experience working in the archives at Bryn Mawr, even if it wasn't necessarily with the materials itself, was a really exciting thing. I can't speak for why Alana was hired because I didn't hire her, but Alana's time here was so great. And, you know, we became good friends during that period of time. So, the next question we guys have for you is like, what was memorable about your internship? Or Will, you can talk about your current project with Loni Ding as well, if you'd like to start.
Sure, yeah, I can go ahead. I think with my internship in particular, that was really my first introduction to the archive world in a formal sense. We had a music archive at the radio station that I worked at, which was a couple shoeboxes full of like VHS tapes and CDs of mixtapes that people had made in the early 2000s, which were very cool, but we didn't really know what we were doing. And so to start working at Densho, which is such a small but like laser focused organization where everybody really knows what they're doing, was very cool to see. And then, you know, a lot of those lessons that I learned in that internship about, you know, like how do we prepare things for, you know, like to meet archival standards? How do we write proper metadata? How do we make things findable for people? Have been really helpful in my current project, which is a bit more self-directed than the internship was. So Loni Ding, as I mentioned, was a documentarian and also incredibly accomplished academic, but the materials that we have are her sort of research and production materials for 2 documentaries that she made in the late 80s and 90s. One is called Nisei Soldier, and the other is called Color of Honor, both of which focus on Japanese American soldiers in World War II. So we've got hundreds and hundreds of like tapes of interviews and notes that she wrote during her interviews, photos that she received from the families of the people that she was working with, behind the scenes photos of her interviews. We will have a blog post coming out about this eventually that will kind of give a better look into what it really takes to make the documentary at the scale that she was working at. But that's been fascinating to see because not only do you get all of these incredible primary sources of people telling their stories of, you know, being drafted into the war from a concentration camp, or, you know, like coming home after the war and, you know, finding that there was nothing there waiting for them. You also get to see Loni Ding's interpretation in real time and, you know, watch her synthesize all of these individual stories and, you know, pieces of information into a bigger whole that, you know, can then really tell the whole story from start to finish. So that's what I've been working on.
I guess if we're going to keep kind of going forward and backwards in chronological order, I can go next. So what was memorable about the internship for me, I had a really good experience overall. There were so many different facets of the experience that I found value in. And one of them was it sounds kind of dry, but is really sincere, which is that I really enjoyed the chance to practice being really systematic about work processes. So I think a lot of us get into this field because we're interested in the sort of mystique or the aura of archives. But the nuts and bolts of it is actually pretty unglamorous. It's a lot of spreadsheets and file management and detail-oriented stuff and repetitive processes. And being given a chance to really focus and process a large amount of material was really valuable for me. It had been a while since I'd been able to do that, and learning the ways that Densho's processes are specific to the organization or overlap with other experiences I've had working elsewhere kind of gave me an understanding of the field that's just a little bit richer now. And I also really appreciated that I had such good support from Micah and Sarah primarily, as well as from Christy and other people I interacted with throughout other parts of the process. But it was great to be given such ownership over my own work and to be treated as really independent and self-directed in some ways, but then also to have so much access to support for my many, many detailed questions. And I felt like I was really able to, like get as much learning as I could out of the experience because of the balance between those two things, which was really well managed by everyone who I got to work with at Densho, which is just great. And then I would say that it was also just really personally meaningful for me to learn more about my own community's history. I'm Yonsei. My grandmother was incarcerated at Poston, along with her 6 or 7 siblings. So I have a little bit of family material from that, but not a whole lot. People were pretty quiet about it, and I have a 5-page written summary of the experience that my great aunt gave to me that her sister, who I never got to meet before she passed away, wrote. But other than that, I have very little texture, I guess, of the experience that my own family went through. And it was really special and meaningful for me to be able to engage with the materials in the collection. Even though it was somebody else's family, it still felt personal. And to be able to contribute to the stewardship of these records felt important and like a rare and special opportunity. So that was definitely a motivator for me in applying. Densho is an organization I had also been aware of since about 2016, I think. So it was like it popped up and I just immediately was like, oh my God, I have to apply for this. This is really, this is essential. Like I'm canceling plans for a week to think about how I want to phrase my cover letter. So to be able to then follow through on that was just really thrilling.
I think that the chance to work with the materials that the Densho preserves is just honestly such an honor and a privilege, and that of course is very memorable. I'll also say that the team of Densho itself is just an incredibly wonderful group of humans. As Micah said, we were able to work there. I know Philip is in the background doing work. While I was an intern at Densho, my sister also worked at Densho. So my sister Natasha Varner was also part of the Densho team, and we do not have Japanese ancestry, and it's really interesting to see how this history and this community has also now become part of our family story. It's something that we talk about. My sister and I have attended pilgrimages together. She continues to do a lot of important historical work around the incarceration experience and the legacy of that experience. And so that's just something like the connection to people at Densho. When I'm at conferences and I see that the archives team and Caitlin and Jeff are going to be at the conference, like I just light up. I think it's a really amazing group of people, and they do a lot of really valuable work to preserve this incredibly important part of American history.
Thank you everyone for sharing. What Evan said prompted another question for me, which is maybe Evan, we can skip you because you shared this a little bit, but what made Will and Alana, what made you interested in applying to the internship in the first place? Or like, how did you hear about Densho?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, my sister worked at Densho, which is part of how I had heard of it, but I had also heard of it because in iSchools and library schools, when we talk about community archives and archives that are on the cutting edge of doing post-custodial archival work, Densho is one of the first names that's mentioned. I definitely went through a program where I graduated with a certificate in archival studies and didn't have a lot of experience doing work with digital collections. And as someone who works at an academic university now, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later in the next questions that Christy was wanting to ask. I work with a lot of students and recent graduates who don't have a lot of digital skills. And I think that that is something that Densho really provides and establishes some of the best practices and standards for the profession. So that's something that was a big part of working with the collections, alongside the ability to work with these incredible stories.
Oh, sorry. Could we do a quick definition of post-custodial?
So a lot of archives retain physical collections, and they'll have boxes and all of these things that you can go in and browse. Densho is a special collection where they don't retain physical objects, and so they digitize the materials that are shared with them, and then those materials are often returned to the original holders of those materials. I know Densho sometimes does work with donors to help them find long-term permanent homes at other institutions. So post-custodial is a model where collections are not retained by the archive in physical form. They're just shared digitally.
My colleague Sarah has a great idiom for it, and it's catch and release. We bring things in, and then we let them go back out into the world. So yeah, Will, do you want to share a little bit about what inspired you to apply to Densho?
Yeah, absolutely. I unfortunately could not claim that I knew about Densho 9 years before I applied. I met Micah and Sarah, one of our digital archivists, at a career fair on the UW campus. And what drew me to Densho initially was my degree is, or at least like my focus within my degree is a little more on the technical side. So I've taken a lot of courses about like metadata, controlled vocabularies, information architecture. And when I was talking to Mike and Sarah originally, they mentioned that, Densho abides by these sort of like open source metadata standards that are very common in the archival profession. I thought that seemed really interesting. Took a little flyer for the Frank and June Sato internship home, looked up Densho and went, huh, this seems pretty sweet. I'm a huge open access nerd. I think that's one of the coolest things that, you can do with the internet, thinking about sites like archive.org or even just like, Wikipedia. Any organization that's making as much information available to people as possible, I think is a really cool thing to be a part of. And so while it was that sort of like technical part of the internship that drew me to Densho originally, what really convinced me to apply was, the relevance of Densho's mission. I think especially in a time where the internet is becoming more and more overrun with just, I don't know, slop, for lack of a better word, to be part of a like digital focused organization that's providing something really focused, really thorough, really carefully put together, is really cool. It's something I'm really proud to be doing.
It's great hearing about everybody's reasons for applying. I mean, as mentioned, I like read Will and Evan's cover letters and kind of understood why they wanted the jobs, but hearing the actual like backstory is so sweet, so great. And now I think the second to last question we have right now is, what are you up to right now? How did your internship at Densho really influence or impact your career? We kind of all know what Will's up to since he's still here at Densho with us. So I think we'll start with Evan, and you can talk a little bit about where you're expecting your career trajectory to go.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm still a student, but in definitely sort of the end stages of finishing. So I'm a part-time student, and I'm that's partially so that I can take other work opportunities as they come up, and slot them alongside my degree work. So I'm currently I have a few different things that I'm patching together, and I would say for sure a lot of it has been influenced by what I did at Densho, and some of that is because I was able to demonstrate. I've been able to demonstrate that I have recent experience working with records in a number of different ways, like digital file editing and description and things like that. But also, I think something that I didn't expect to be as impactful, both in how I think about my direction and also what I've been able to demonstrate, is actually because of that blog post that I wrote, which is I realized that I really enjoy the experience of straddling the role between archivist and researcher. And that's a little bit of a tricky position to be in when you're looking at the job market, because archives are generally pretty underfunded and there isn't a lot of spare time for an archivist to sort of indulge their interests as a writer or a researcher. But I've realized that something that appeals to me is the outreach and public programming side. I'm not totally sure if that's sort of my sole focus now, but I was able to take a position at Harvard last summer and fall that allowed me to really get into making archives accessible directly to the community that is a main stakeholder and sort of created these archives. So I was working on a project about um, a it's actually interesting hearing Will, also this is another connection in our backgrounds, like a guy who took a lot of VHS tapes and audio tapes of Boston rock club performances in the 80s and 90s. And that collection represents a lot of people who are still around and represents, like, for them, a really significant part of their lives, and also is a window into music culture, music scenes, and cultural stuff from a bygone era of this city. And so Harvard was able to do some programming, including curating a physical gallery exhibition, putting on a live performance and screening of material from the collection, and a digital exhibit. And I was able to participate in that after having worked with some of the materials in a way that really drew on the knowledge I had gained from working with this stuff and becoming really familiar with it. And that's something that archivists don't always get to do. Like, Micah knows more about the D'Amoto family than probably a lot of the D'Amoto family. And that knowledge doesn't always get drawn out, that the archivist has, is sort of a byproduct of the work, but we don't always have easy outlets for making that knowledge publicly available directly. It's more sort of, it becomes a tool in facilitating other people's research. So I'm really motivated to pursue or continue pursuing work that allows me to do a little bit of that, like both working with the collection, but then also being really directly involved in communicating insights from that collection. And I'm currently working on a book project. I'm working for a journalist who has exclusive access in a cool way to an archive that isn't yet at an institution. And I'm working in the archive to help her with research. And also I'm writing about what I find and doing independent research to help her prepare to write a book about a recording studio that was in Boston in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. So it all builds on itself, right? And I'm not necessarily committed to being a subject expert in one area, but there's all these different skills that come together over multiple experiences.
So I'll share. I currently work at the University of Arizona. I am the coordinator of a Mellon-funded initiative called Digital Borderlands. It's been a multi-year, multi-phase project with the goal of integrating library services into research and instruction across campus. So archives are one important component of that, and we think about how can we get students and faculty to engage with archives. And the specific focus of this is to tell stories about the borderlands. We're on the US-Mexico borderlands. And so how do we complicate notions of what borders and the borderlands look like? And how do we encourage students to become thoughtful and creative users and consumers of information. And so this is definitely something that Densho has influenced me. And prior to this job, I was at Arizona State University. I was the archivist of community-driven archives, and that was a project that sought to expand the overall history of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, and LGBTQ communities in Arizona. So all of those communities are very, very underrepresented in the historical records of the state. And so we did a lot of work with community to help people learn how to preserve uh, and share and use collections of their own and others for research, as well as digitizing collections to make those more publicly accessible. And so my experience there with Densho was really helping ASU to figure out how we were going to digitize these collections, how we were going to describe collections that didn't have robust metadata standards to accurately describe those histories. And in general, just having people think about the archives. In my current work, I will say that I still have the opportunity to reference Densho. So for instance, I was consulting a faculty at the University of Arizona who wanted to take his class on a field trip to the Gordon Hirabayashi campground, which is a campground that was named after Gordon Hirabayashi, who was someone who resisted the orders to report to camp. And so he refused to go to camp, and because of that, he was sent to prison. He was considered such a threat to the United States that they wanted to send him to prison. However, he was made to hitchhike from Seattle to Arizona, where he was imprisoned. So they just basically set him free to go hitchhike across the US as a major national threat. The logic is a bit confounding. But I was consulting with this faculty, and he hadn't used the Densho resources before. And so I was able to connect him to oral history collections and materials in the digital repository and the Densho Encyclopedia. And it's something that's the beauty of Densho, is that because it is accessible to anyone everywhere. Will, your cat is an outstanding participant in this conversation. It's so valuable because anyone can access it, and you can enrich so many things around the world with these materials.
Thank you so much. Could we get a quick definition on, or I guess clarification on, community-centered archives versus like a traditional archive? Either Micah or Alana, either one. I mean, all of you could answer this question probably, but
So I say institutional archives. So archives that are run by institutions and have more traditional narratives. Community archives are archives that are for and by and about the communities that they are representing. Micah,
thank you.
I know that's a short and simplified. You're welcome to expand.
No, I think it's great. Institutional archive, I think the best example would be the Arizona State University archives or the University of Arizona archives are institutional archives. They were founded by the universities and are maintained by the universities and are about the university and the surrounding areas, versus Densho, which is a community archive, because we were founded by the Japanese American community and work towards preserving the community's history. So,
Thank you. I'm like the only non-archivist here, so I'm like, if I feel like past me would have been confused about that, I feel like some of our audience might be. Let's see. I just want to say to the audience, thank you so much for being here, and let us know in the chat if you have any questions for our panelists. But in the meantime, we'll go to our last official question, which is, what advice would you all give to anybody who's interested in becoming an archivist? what would you say to them? And I guess we can start with Will.
Sure. I mean, I still feel that I'm in the beginning stages of my career as an archivist, so I unfortunately don't have much past wisdom to look back on. But I think one thing that uh, ended up being really useful for me was sort of trying to get into, archiving or preservation, not technically in like an archive, or because, those doors can be pretty hard to open, especially without an MLIS degree, I feel. And so that sort of like prior experience I had, just working with like the materials that we were trying to archive at WSUM when I was there. If you're part of any sort of community organization that's got some sort of history that they want to preserve, taking that on and, seeing if it feels satisfying or worthwhile to you to try and organize and preserve that in some way, I think is a nice way to get started without having to deal with some of the traditional barriers to the profession.
I can go next, I guess. Yeah, I would say I've gotten so much value from just working at gathering different types of experiences at different places. Densho, I think I explained before the things that I learned at Densho that felt unique, but also that I think I did also express that it's useful even to see the commonalities between the ways that different places handle similar different types of records, and you can get a real understanding of the field just from seeing things done differently or the same in different contexts. But there's so much that I learned here that I never could have learned, like at my experience at Harvard or elsewhere, or certainly that I would learn at like a corporate archives or a law library or something like that. So even if I don't necessarily want to work for an institution like Harvard, I've learned things there that I think would also probably help me if I somehow down the line wound up working back at Densho. And so there's sort of a lot of value in just trying different things out, partially also because it exposes you to so many different people who have their own perspectives on the field. So yeah, that's something that I think has been really helpful for me so far.
I would say, I'm someone who has experience supervising graduate students and also hiring for archival positions at institutional archives. And I think that something that's really important for people who are interested in archives is engaging with digital skills. A lot of us, and I know myself, I am very much an analog girl in a digital world. I came to archives because I like holding letters and reading journals and touching, artifacts. And I think that there is something really important about learning those digital skills. And I think that Densho does a really beautiful job of thinking about how to interpret those materials and still convey some of the uniqueness and specialness of those materials in that digital context. So I would say, first of all, thinking about gaining digital skills as an archivist is really important. I will say also from my perspective in the profession, it is hard to find positions as archivists. There aren't a lot of them, and I think that Evan has mentioned something that I think is really wonderful, which is two things. One, gaining experience at a lot of different kinds of institutions and thinking about different applications of archives. And then two, thinking about what other ways archives are used. So what interpretive work and research work are you able to do to apply archival skills? Because building on just the capacity to work with archives, I think is professionally really important. So that's my very practical professional advice.
Well, thank you so much to everybody, all our panelists for being here with us and sharing your experiences. And thank you especially to our history keepers for providing the reliable support that we rely on. Sorry, that was a duplicative sentence. So yeah, I think we will close out here if you all don't have any other questions. And we will make sure to record this and post it on our YouTube. So if you want to share it with anybody, you'll be able to do that. And we will share it with, I know that there are definitely a few folks who mentioned that they wanted to watch today, but they couldn't make the time. So make sure that they get the recording as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you.